this Thanksgiving time of the year. We have so much to be grateful for, and every one of us in this group can look at our lives and see your hand of blessing on us in many ways, and I praise you for that. We lift up these who've been mentioned for prayer tonight, and you know the needs. I pray that you would be with them and encourage them and walk with them through this stage of their lives. I thank you for your word and the part of your word at which we're going to look tonight, and help us, God, to see in this word, in these words, what you want us to see, and allow your spirit to make application to our lives as you desire. I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. One thing that educators have discovered for nothing new for a long time is the importance of repetition and review in learning. The more we repeat, the more we review, the more we comprehend. And that's especially true, I think, as we age. The older I get, the more I have to remind myself of certain things that used to be second nature. They're not quite so much second nature anymore. And one reason I like to begin these studies with just kind of looking back a little bit is because we need to be reminded of what we're looking at. The review and repetition is very important, especially because we're not meeting right now every week. We tend to have a lot of breaks in there, so we're kind of chopped up in how we're doing this. So I want to remind you several things about the Gospel of John before we jump into chapter 11. We've said several times now that John tells us very clearly why he wrote this book. That's not true of every biblical book, by the way, even every New Testament book. Sometimes the purpose is not clearly stated. We have to deduce it from the text itself. But John tells us in chapter 20, verse 32, these things have been written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and believing you may have life in his name. So he wrote the book to help us understand who Jesus is and what we experience, what we have when we are in him. And we've talked about how John accomplishes that purpose of his writing. He does it in two ways. He lists a series of miracles that Jesus performed to give us insight into who he was. There are 7 miracles in John's gospel that are highlighted. 5 of those miracles occur only in John's gospel. They're not Matthew, Mark, or Luke. And we as we go through the book, we've seen most of those. We're going to look at the last one in John's gospel tonight in John chapter 11. But there's 7 miracles there that we look at to understand who Jesus is. And then he lists a series of statements. They're called the I am statements that Jesus uses to describe himself. And the phrase I am, of course, we've talked about how it points back to Exodus 3:14, where God told Moses that if someone asks his name, just say, I am, have sent you. I am, this is who I am. And we've seen so far in John's gospel, we've explored 3 of these 6 famous I am statements. We looked at I am the bread of life in chapter 6. We looked at I am the light of the world in chapter 8. We looked at I am the good shepherd in chapter 10. In chapter 14, there's the statement, I am the way, the truth, and the life. In chapter 15, there's the statement, I am the true vine. But we're going to look tonight at the one in chapter 10, where Jesus makes one of the most astounding statements I think ever made. I am the resurrection and the life. And he who believes in me shall live even if he dies. And it's interesting, as we come to John chapter 11, this is a unique section of John, because in this one chapter, we have one of the miracles that occurs just in John's gospel. And we also have, in the midst of that miracle account, the I am statement, I am the resurrection and the life. As I've looked at John chapter 11 this week and thought about it, the thought struck me that for many people, I would say most people, death is a terror. The people live in fear of death. I think if you ask the average person in our culture, if you could have a serious conversation, and you ask that person, what is the absolute worst thing that could happen to you? They'd probably say, well, the worst thing is I could die. I could lose my life. And I think the tendency of most people is to view death as an enemy to be avoided at all costs. Paul Tillich was a German-born theologian. He left uh, Hitler's left Germany during Hitler's rise to power, came to the United States, and he made this statement. He said, "We always live." It means humans as a whole always live in the conscious or unconscious anxiety of having to die. And because of that anxiety that just kind of, I think, is built into us, the words of Jesus we're going to focus on tonight, I think, resonate, at least with me, in a very special way. And it's astonishing that Jesus would say in John 11:25, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me shall live even if he dies." And I know you've heard that verse hundreds of times in your life. I've quoted that verse at almost every funeral I do, but it's such an amazing statement. Now, as is true of all these I am statements, to really understand them, it's important to look at the context in which they're spoken, in which they appear in John's gospel. So we're going to begin by looking at the context of what Jesus said in this chapter, and kind of read portions of John chapter 11 to get the context in our mind. At the end of John chapter 10, and we've not done John 10 yet. We've kind of skipped around doing these I am statements. We've not done John 10 yet, but at the end of John chapter 10, we see Jesus and disciples leaving Jerusalem and going east. They go, down the Jericho road toward Jericho. And they cross the Jordan River and go to the eastern side of the Jordan River to a place that's called the Transjordan now, or sometimes called the Transjordan. It's in the area where John the Baptist had his ministry. And he went there. He got away from Jerusalem because the religious leaders there were wanting to put him to death. They wanted to kill him. And it wasn't time for his death. So he went east and went to a safe place for a while. And while he was there, word was sent to him that Lazarus, who was the brother of Mary and Martha, was very ill. Now, Lazarus and Mary and Martha were very close to Jesus. It's all indications, as you read the New Testament, that there was a very special place in his heart that Jesus had for that particular family. They lived just outside Jerusalem in a place called Bethany. Bethany's on the southeastern slope of the Mount of Olives, just to the east of Jerusalem there. They lived there. Jesus spent time there, perhaps stayed in their home during Passion Week. He'd go into Jerusalem and then come back out during that last week of his life there in Jerusalem. And there was a real closeness. They were almost like family to him. And it's interesting, when Jesus got word that Lazarus was sick, he didn't go to his bedside. He didn't rush to Jerusalem. He stayed away for a couple of days, and then word was sent to him that Lazarus died. And when he heard that Lazarus died, then he decided to go to Jerusalem or to Bethany and to be with Mary and Martha. And the disciples questioned the wisdom of that because the Jews there were willing to kill Jesus. So I want to pick up the story in John chapter 11, beginning with the middle part of verse 11, and just read down through about verse 16 first. Let's read that part first. And I'm reading from the New American Standard Bible, as I usually do. Here's what it says. Jesus said, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go that I may awaken him out of sleep." The disciples therefore said to him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover." Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he was speaking of literal sleep. Then Jesus therefore said to them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him." And then this next verse is just kind of a fun verse. I just can't skip verse 16. Thomas, therefore, who is called Didymus, the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." Thomas was the pessimist of the group, and he was always questioning, always doubting. And I just see this as kind of a humorous statement. Thomas said, "Okay, we're going to Jerusalem. Let's go with him. We're all going to die together. Let's go die." So Jesus heard that Lazarus had died, and he made his way to Bethany. Now, when he got there, uh, he was met by Martha first, the sister of Lazarus. And I want to pick up the account in verse 20, where Martha, I'm sorry, in verse 20 through 26, where Martha and Jesus have this conversation. So let's skip down in your Bible to verse 20 of chapter 11. Martha, therefore, when she heard that Jesus was coming, went to meet him, but Mary still sat in the house. Martha therefore said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. And Jesus said to her, your brother shall rise again. And Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me shall live even if he dies, and everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Now, after that conversation, it wasn't long before Mary came. And there was another conversation, a very similar conversation between Jesus and Mary. And then after that, I want to pick up the story in verse 33, after Jesus talked to Mary. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, this is verse 33 now, stop speaking of Mary, and the Jews came with her, also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and was troubled, and said, where have you laid him? And they said to him, Lord, come and see. And Jesus wept. And so the Jews were saying, behold, how he loved him. But some of them said, could not this man who opened the eyes of him who was blind have kept this man from also dying? Jesus, therefore, being deeply moved within, came to the tomb. Now it was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. And Jesus said, remove the stone. Martha, the sister of the deceased, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be a stench, for he has been dead 4 days. And Jesus said to her, did I not say to you, if you believe, you will see the glory of God? And so he removed the stone, and Jesus raised his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou heardest me. And I knew that thou hearest me always, but because of the people standing around, I said it, that they may believe that thou didst send me. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. He who had died came forth, bound hand and foot with wrappings, and his face was wrapped around with a cloth. And Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Okay, now with that story in mind, I know you've heard that story before. I wanted to get it out there again before you. With that story in mind, let's talk about what it means to us. While the Bible doesn't tell us everything that we, or at least I, would like to know about death, it's my conviction the Bible tells us everything we need to know about death, everything that's important for us to know about death. And what I want to do tonight, just kind of in summary fashion, is point out what I see as four practical things that this event teaches us about death. Now, some are rather obvious, maybe all of them are rather obvious, but they all need to be said and kind of be burned into our minds as well as we think about this subject. And the first thing on my list is that this story reminds me that death is real, and we shouldn't try to minimize the reality of death. One of the basic problems I think that most people have when it comes to dealing with death is just a refusal to deal with it. I don't want to think about it. I want to just put it out of my mind. We know on the intellectual level, we know in our heads that everybody dies. We know that. We know that death is one of the very few certainties of our existence. We know no one, as the old saying says, no one gets out of this world alive. We know that up here, but emotionally, we have a very difficult time accepting the idea that I am going to die, that my loved ones are going to die. And because of our emotional struggle with that concept, we tend to push the subject out of our minds. We pretend it's not really there. It's not real. We just don't want to deal with it. And I think one thing that John chapter 11 teaches us about death is that the Bible deals with the subject very frankly and very honestly. Excuse me, I gotta get a little drink here. The conversation that took place, the first part that I read from John chapter 11 between Jesus and the disciples, it is really very interesting. Um, when he told the disciples in verse 11 that our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, they thought he meant physical sleep. And because they misunderstood what he said, in verse 14, Jesus just stated very clearly and bluntly, Lazarus is dead. No minimizing it. He didn't soft sell it. He didn't, duck it. He just dealt with the reality of death. There's a interesting illustration that I found in my notes that I'd forgotten about, but it really spoke to me this week. Stuart Briscoe is a well-known pastor, was a well-known pastor. He passed away some time ago. He was also a kind of conference leader, a famous speaker. And he wrote a book called Spirit Life, one of his many books, but Spirit Life, one of his books. In that book, there's an account of an insurance salesman that came to his house to try to sell him some life insurance. And he really flustered this insurance salesman. I want you to hear the conversation that took place between Stuart Briscoe, this Christian pastor, and this insurance guy. And here's how he wrote it in his book. The insurance man speaks first. He says, "If something should happen to you, Mr. Briscoe," he started to say, but I interrupted him with, "Please don't say that. It upsets me." And he was a little startled, but tried again. "But with all due respect, sir, we must be ready if something should happen to us." "Don't say that," I insisted. And he looked totally bewildered and said, "I don't understand what I said to upset you." "Then I will tell you," I replied. "It upsets me that you talk about life's only certainty as if it's a possibility. Death isn't a possibility, it's a certainty. You don't say if, you say when, whenever the subject is death." And I think one thing this event in John 11 should remind us of, that we are all destined to die. That is what's going to happen to us and to those around us as well. And so we shouldn't minimize that reality. So that's the first thing that I see in this story, that I know it's elementary, but it's very important. The second thing, by experience, when someone dies, when someone we love dies, someone close to us dies, it's a painful experience for those of us left behind. I'm looking at this group here in your faces. I know every one of you have experienced very intensely the pain of death and the hurt that comes to those who are left behind. One of the startling things about John chapter 11 is how honestly the chapter deals with the emotions of Jesus in relation to the death of Lazarus. It's all through this story here. Excuse me, I got something caught in my throat. Look at verse 33. Verse 33 says, "He, Jesus, was deeply moved in spirit and was troubled." Verse 35, the shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. Verse 38, Jesus therefore again deeply moved within. You can't read this and not feel or see the emotional pain that Jesus was experiencing during this event. Now, why was he feeling that? What was the cause of this emotion? It's interesting when you read the commentaries. There are a number of possibilities put forth. So some say that Jesus was upset because of the reaction of Martha and Mary to him when he arrived in Bethany. They both said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." And you can almost hear the sadness, the disappointment, the hurt, and maybe even maybe anger in their voices at that. Others say he was upset because, in order to demonstrate his power over death to the unbelieving people, he had to call Lazarus back from the peace and the joy of heaven. And he didn't want to do that to his friend Lazarus, but he had to for the sake of the people around there. Others say he was upset just by death itself and the power of death that he came to our world to destroy. And all those things maybe have merit. I don't know, which is best there, but it seems to me that one of the clearest and most logical ways to explain the Lord's feelings here is that he was just saddened by the death of his friend and the grief of those around him. And what I want you to see by that, and I know you already know this, but when death invades our lives, and it's going to, and you know it's going to, it already has, it's painful for those of us who are left behind. No matter what the circumstances, no matter how natural it may seem, death leaves those who are left behind with hurt. And as I've said in every funeral I've ever done, probably over the years, to people who are grieving a loved one or friends, there's nothing unspiritual. There's nothing wrong with grief. Even Jesus experienced grief, as I see it in this passage here. One writer talks about grief not being our enemy but our friend. It helps us to let our emotions catch up with what our mind already knows, and it's not wrong to grieve. Lloyd Ogilvie was the chaplain of the U.S. Senate for some time. He was also a Presbyterian pastor in our nation. And he tells a story in his book, "The Bush is Still Burning," about a new Christian convert. It was a young woman, and she had a young child, and that young child died. And she was very young in the faith, very immature in the faith. And some of her Christian friends who were around her gave her some very bad advice. They said, now that you're a Christian, you don't have to grieve the death of a loved one. You should rejoice because they're with Jesus. And so what she did is she suppressed her grief and the loss of her child. And for many years, she just pretended it didn't hurt until, he says, much later in life, when this suppressed grief came out in some very unhealthy ways. And one thing I see in John 11 is that it's okay for us to grieve those who've gone ahead of us. There's nothing wrong with grieving the loss of a loved one. Matter of fact, it's unhealthy not to do that. And as Jesus hurt, we sometimes hurt too. Now, those two things are kind of negative, I guess. Death is real; it hurts someone dies. So we know that, but that's not the end of the story. There are two other things here I want you to see in this story before we end it. The third truth I see here is, and it's one of the, I think, most promising things in the Scripture, is that death does not rob us of our personal identity. We don't stop being who we are because we die physically. There are many people in our world who have a very distorted view of what it means to die and what happens to a person when they die. Some say that we're just physical, we're just a biological being, and when the biology ends, we end. When the physical part is gone, then it's all over. There's no more to us. That death is just the end of who we are. Others, and I think this might be the majority view of the world as a whole, say that there is some form of life after death, but it's not a personal existence. We kind of go back to some cosmic consciousness, but we're not distinct individual beings after death. Now neither of those obviously reflect the biblical view of life after death. The Scripture teaches that each one of us is a unique creation of God. God made us. God formed us in our mother's womb. Well, we are made in God's image. We're made after God's likeness. And even in death and after death, we do not use that unique identity that God has bestowed upon us. And this event in John 11, it is obvious that death did not rob Lazarus of his personal identity. And when Jesus decided to call Lazarus back from the dead, he called him by name. He said in verse 43, Lazarus, come forth. And I think it's significant that verse 44 says, he who had died came forth. The same guy who went into the grave is the guy who came out of the grave. Lazarus was the same before death and after death. And to me, one of the encouraging things about the biblical view of death is that death doesn't change who we are. It just changes where we are. Our location changes, but our identity that does not change. That's to be pretty clear in this story. And of course, the last thing, which is probably where I should have started, Jesus has defeated the power of death over us. That's the main point of this story. The raising of Lazarus is a preview of the reason Jesus came to our world. He came to defeat the power of death over us. And because he faced and conquered death, we have the assurance that we will conquer death as well. I want to read how Paul put it, 1 Corinthians 15. I won't take a lot of time to read the whole chapter there, but there's a part toward the end that I just really love. In verses 54 and 55 or so of that chapter, here's what he says. He says, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. And that's why Jesus came. He came to defeat the power of death over his people. I can't read John chapter 11 without thinking of that famous play written by Eugene O'Neill, the American playwright. And I've told this story before. I've told it in several funeral sermons I've used, and maybe in our Bible study. I don't remember if we did it here or not. But it's the play's called Lazarus Laughed. It's really a classic that O'Neill wrote. And it's the story of Lazarus, but what happened to him after he was brought back to life in this world. And in this fictitious story, and it's very creative, after Lazarus is brought back from the dead, he spends his life, on earth as a Christian. He's persecuted for his faith, and he's taken before the Roman Emperor Caligula, who was just crazy, very evil, and he couldn't control Lazarus. And Caligula was getting angrier and angrier, and he threatened Lazarus with execution. He said, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to kill you. And Lazarus, who'd already died once, he was brought back from life by Jesus, looked at Caligula. He just laughed. He just laughed at him. And he said, Caligula, didn't you know, haven't you heard, death is dead. Death is dead. And I love that phrase, death is dead, because that's the primary message of John chapter 11. When Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life, he's saying, I've defeated the power of death. And so death is real? Yes. Death hurts when a loved one dies? Yes. But the assurance we have as believers is we don't cease to be when we die, because the one who is the resurrection and the life has faced and conquered death for us. And that's what John chapter 11, at least the first part of the chapter, is all about. And that's why this statement, I think, is so great. I know all of you have had experience with death. Every one of you have a story to tell. And I walk with you, some of you, through your experiences there. And I also know it doesn't go away. Grief doesn't end. It changes, but it doesn't end though. And so in our constant grief, our continuing grief, this chapter gives us something of substance to cling to hold on to. So when you get to feeling overwhelmed by it, go back to John 11. It'll lift you up, because it's a wonderful picture there. Okay, your observations or comments about this chapter. Anything you see there you want to share?
I think of that Southern gospel song, 4 Days Late by Karen Peck and New River. The lyric says, isn't it great when he's 4 days late, he's still on time? And those words just move me. And this was just, I guess, one of my favorite scriptures. I know when I'm trying to, comfort somebody in death, I tell them it's okay to cry. Jesus cried when Lazarus died.
Right.
You
Right.
I
Yeah.
let them know, hey, Jesus cried when he lost his friend, so it's okay to cry.
Right.
And so many
Not
people like
only it's
want
okay,
to hold it in.
it's necessary, I think. Yeah,
Yeah, really.
yeah. Yeah, there's no lesson here. You reminded me of it, Pansy, about 4 days late. Another lesson in this story is that, we don't always understand what God's up to, God's timing. I mean, Mary and Martha had no clue why Jesus didn't come immediately and heal Lazarus. I mean, they'd seen his miracles. They knew what he could do. They sent
Mhm.
word to him, and he waited till Lazarus died to come. And you can hear the disappointment in their voices. Lord, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. And
Mhm.
the implied question is, where were you? Why weren't you here? But God had a plan. They just didn't know what it was yet. So
Martha was
their
getting
their
on
plan
those
was,
skates.
God, when are you going to show up? Well, he
Well,
shows up at the right time for us. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
but I think that each person, uh, relative, I mean, if it's a very close relative, it's a little different. Over the years, of course, I've seen a lot of friends die since I've
right.
lived this long. But the thing of it is, yes, I miss them and I grieve in my own way for them, but I'm very happy that I had my life touched them.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's exactly right, Bob. I mean, and that's one of the things we ought to do. You always look for, okay, you know while we grieve what we don't have, you got to be grateful for what we had. Always, you always be grateful for what you had. You just, it's just,
And you still have it.
yeah,
Got
yeah,
your
that's right.
memories.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, yeah. Does the subject make you uncomfortable? I'm just, I mean, talk about this. Does that make you uncomfortable?
Doesn't?
No.
I mean, people joke about it. You got to stop playing golf with. They joke about death, but I think they joke because they don't want to really deal with the idea they're going to die. Really, I mean, we just did a memorial tree here at our club. We had a couple of guys die this past year, and one died of a heart attack on the golf course, and another guy died of a heart attack at his place of business, and we have a plaque there with the names on it, and there's two names on there now, in place for about 15 more names. And the question is always who's going to be next? Who's next on that? And I have some friends tell me they want to order my plaque just in case, So,
Well, you don't want to
but
win
they
that.
joke about it, but they don't
No
want to
matter
deal
how
with
you
it.
feel about death, you still don't want to win that game. You don't want to be the
That's
next
right.
one.
Yeah. Yeah. We do try to put off death. We do almost in a sense to our detriment sometime, but yeah, and I don't think we should fear it, nor should we hurry it up. We just need to live what we can live, and then when we die as gracefully as we can, knowing that we're okay with that too. I can't view death like a paying for a trip. Carol and I still like to travel. We're still able to some degree, and one of the fun parts of travel is just planning for it. Anticipating, all that stuff, and we can anticipate in a positive way what it's like to cross over to the other side too. And being reunited with loved ones and friends. And I heard someone say, I forgot where I heard this now, but the older we get and the more friends we have on the other side, the more inviting heaven seems to be because they're the group's over there, the group's over there, and that does happen to us, I think. Yeah.
The
Okay.
minister who preached my maternal grandfather's funeral, he said, I'm not afraid of death. It's the dying process that bothers me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's true of a lot of people. It's not
Yeah.
it's not death. It's how we get there. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
none of us want to have the pain that we associate with so many people's death.
Right. Right. That's true, Bob. Yeah. Yeah.
And the
Something I
larger,
thought, oh, go ahead.
the older that we get, I think the larger the group in heaven gets. and it becomes a little more attractive.
That's right, Connie. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was thinking today as I was looking at this passage again of this group. Some of y'all were with us then. We'd have what 40 people at our house here, and of that 40, probably 24 or so are no longer with us. I mean, which is crazy, but it just and that's what life does. That's what it does. So yeah. So I guess I'll commend you as the survivors. You're still on the island. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The
Okay.
thought crossed my mind tonight about Jesus being moved, of Lazarus dying. He was probably thinking ahead of what is he was going to have to go through on the cross.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
And he showed that, Lazarus was raised, and so he was going to be raised too after his death.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I just think it's really important. In the scope of John's gospel, by the way, the word life is all through this gospel. I mean, it's about life. I come to you, I have life, have an abundance, and so putting this right in the middle of this gospel, it's just a reminder that Jesus is the bringer of life. Even in the face of physical death, he brings life. That's encouraging to know. Yeah. All right, next week is Thanksgiving, of course, so we will not be doing Thanksgiving. And then Carol and I will be gone for 2 weeks after that. Uh, on December is the 15th, Carol, is that right? Yeah. Monday night, we're gonna do carols and candles at our house again. We have a little group at our church, little home group at our church that we attend. They like to do that, but everyone's invited. It's not just for them. So if you're able to get out and can get out and want to get out on the 15th on Monday night, I'll remind you later on. We're gonna do that at 6 o'clock at our house here. And if you don't like to drive at night too much, you can come before it gets dark. You have to go home at night. You can't spend the night. Well, you could. You'll camp out our living room. But we'd invite you to come if you want to come that on the 15th. And then we'll just look at the December. It's really getting busy in December. I know for everybody, but we'll probably meet at least once or twice in December, just on Zoom, and then. In January, I know I'm in Peru for at least maybe 1 or 2 Thursdays for the youth camp, and Carol and I have another trip in December, in January too. But we'll just have to kind of hit and miss when we can, and so when you can come in, that's great. And whether it's 3 or 4 of us or 10 or 12, I don't care. It's I love seeing you guys during the week when we can. I miss when we don't do it. So we'll keep doing this as long as you want to do it. But it is going to be kind of hit and miss for the next few weeks anyway.
well, Larry, let me say something. You know that Gail and I love to travel. We've been with you and made many trips with you, and do it while you can.
Well,
That's what I'm saying. There's
Yeah.
going to come a time when all of a sudden getting around is really, well, a pain in the someplace. But I mean, it's difficult. So while
Yeah.
you're still able to move and do
Well,
things,
you and Gail are kind of our inspiration in that, Bob. Y'all kind of model for us how to do that, and so that's why we keep doing it. We do keep doing it.
but just keep it up. That's
I
great.
was thinking, by the way, I don't know if you remember the trip we took with you guys. Went to London and Barcelona,
Yeah.
and then well, I am the age right now, I think, that you were. We did that trip. So. If I've calculated right, I think I'm the age now you were. I thought you were older, by the way, but you weren't.
Well, it could
Yeah,
be said that maybe it's not my turn to go to heaven. I don't know. He's still flipping the
yeah,
coin.
yeah. I keep telling Carol, you never know when your last trip's going to be, and so just
That's
keep
true.
planning till it's not, and so we are doing that. So that's why we have some
Yeah.
friends that I met through Oakmont, and I did their wedding. The older couple, both of them were widowed, and I did their wedding several years ago. And they have a timeshare in Hawaii. They want us to go to Hawaii with them in January to play golf and
That's
visit
great.
for a week. So we're going to do that and go to, because I'm going, and Carol's not going to Peru this year. She didn't want to go to youth camp, but I got to go back to youth camp in Peru. By the way, speaking of Peru, Lauren started her Christmas projects this past weekend. And she'll have 55 to 60 Christmas events during the next 2 or 3 weeks. It's
Wow.
a very, very frenetic pace. So keep her in your prayers too during this time. That's a bit. She's been sick too. She got some kind of stomach virus over there, which is just horrible. You have it in Peru, and she was worried. Had to go to the hospital and get some IV fluids. She was so dehydrated, and but she's back now working. But keep her in your prayers during this time because it's a busy time out there right now in Peru. Yeah. Okay, you guys, anything else tonight you want to share? Yeah, it's good to see y'all. And good to see everybody. And hope you have a good Thanksgiving. And we'll see you then. And we'll get back in a few weeks. Okay.
Great.
Good night, everybody.
All right.
Good
Have a good
night.
night.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Adios.
Yeah, happy